The Golden Thread, A Story of Ancient Greece. Episode 1, The Palace and the Labyrinth, circa 1700 to 1100 BC. The Minoan World and the Mycenaean Ascent. Our thread begins not with spinning, but with a snap. The year is around 1450 BC. On the island of Crete, the great palace of Knossos is burning. For centuries, it had been the radiant, pulsing heart of a maritime empire. Its walls were alive with frescoes, lithe, bare-breasted youths leaping over charging bulls, dolphins dancing in azure seas, processions of offering-bearers with perfect, serene smiles. This was not a culture of warriors, but of merchants, artists, and priests. They worshipped a mother goddess, and their king was not a warlord, but perhaps a priest-king who performed sacred dances. Their palaces had no walls. Their power was the trireme and the trade route, not the spear. Now, smoke blackens those vibrant frescoes. The cause is a cataclysm that still puzzles us, a titanic volcanic eruption on the island of Thera, 70 miles to the north, which sent tsunamis crashing against Crete's shores and choked its skies with ash. But the final blow came from the north. Enter the Mycenaeans. While the Minoans danced with bulls, on the rocky mainland of Greece, in places like Mycenae, Tiryns, and Pylos, a harder, fiercer people had been watching and learning. They were the first Greek speakers, ancestors of Homer's heroes. Where Knossos was open, Mycenae was a grim citadel, its entrance framed by the massive lion gate, a statement of raw, predatory power. Their kings were buried in deep tholos tombs with golden death masks pressed to their faces. The most famous mask, found by Heinrich Schliemann, led him to telegraph, "I have gazed upon the face of Agamemnon." The Mycenaeans were the ultimate borrowers and usurpers. They adopted Minoan writing, Linear A, and adapted it for their own archaic Greek tongue, creating Linear B to record inventories of chariots, swords, and slaves. They took the Minoan artistic style and made it theirs, but the subjects grew martial. They coveted Crete's wealth and its mastery of the sea. In the chaos following the Thera eruption, the Mycenaeans struck. They sailed south, not as destroyers at first, but as occupiers. They installed themselves in the blackened halls of Knossos. For another 50 years, a hybrid, Mycenaean-ruled Crete flourished. But their world was a fragile one, built on a network of palatial economies so centralized that if the palace fell, everything fell. And fall it did. Around 1200 to 1100 BC, the entire eastern Mediterranean was convulsed by a storm of disasters we call the Bronze Age collapse. A mysterious coalition the Egyptians called the Sea Peoples raided coasts from Anatolia to the Nile Delta. Earthquakes shook the foundations of cities. Climate change brought drought and famine. The intricate trade networks that fed the Mycenaean palaces disintegrated. One by one, the great citadels were sacked and burned. Pylos fell, its Linear B tablets baked in the fire that destroyed it, preserving their last, frantic records of coastwatchers spotting unknown ships. Mycenae and Tiryns followed. The world plunged into a dark age. Writing was lost. Grand architecture forgotten. Population plummeted. Survivors huddled in small, scattered villages, their only connection to the glorious past the fading stories told by firelight, tales of mighty kings, a war at a place called Troy, and a cunning hero who took 10 years to find his way home. The first, gleaming strand of the golden thread, the sophistication of the Minoans, the might of the Mycenaeans, had been severed. All that remained were embers and echoes, waiting to be kindled again into a new, and very different, flame. Episode 2, Age of Iron and Song, circa 1100, 750 BC. The Greek Dark Ages and the dawn of the polis. For nearly 4 centuries, Greece was a land of ghosts and whispers. The grand palaces were rubble-covered hills where shepherds grazed their flocks. The art of writing was lost, and with it, history. This was a time of iron, not gold, a harder, poorer metal that democratized warfare. Anyone could have an iron sword, not just a king with a bronze one. People lived in small, scattered, self-sufficient villages, ruled by local chieftains who were little more than the toughest farmer in the valley. Society reverted to a simple, tribal structure. But in this deep freeze, the seeds of Greece's future were quietly germinating. Two crucial developments defined this age. First, the Great Migration. As conditions deteriorated, waves of Greek speakers sailed east across the Aegean, settling the coasts of Asia Minor, modern Turkey. They split into three tribal groups: the Ionians in the center, whose greatest city would be Miletus, the Dorians in the south, and the Aeolians in the north. This diaspora would become a vital source of trade, ideas, and future conflict with the Persian Empire. Second, and most importantly, was the birth of the polis. Out of the ashes of the Mycenaean kingdoms, a new political organism began to form. It was not a kingdom ruled by a god-king, but a citizen state. The polis was more than a city. It was a collective identity built around a fortified hill, acropolis, and a common meeting place, agora. Its members were the hoplites, heavily armed infantrymen who owned land. Their strength in the phalanx, a wall of interlocking shields, depended on solidarity and courage, not noble birth. Equality among these warriors became the ideal. But how do we know anything about this dark age? Through song. This was the age of Homer. Though he composed later, c. 750 BC, his epic poems, the Iliad and the Odyssey, are set in the blurred, mythologized memory of the Mycenaean world. Yet they perfectly express the emerging values of the polis era: individual glory, kleos, cunning intelligence, metis, the fickleness of the gods, and the terrible cost of pride, hubris. Achilles' rage and Odysseus' endurance became the foundational texts of Greek culture, recited at festivals, teaching generations what it meant to be Greek, to strive, to suffer, and to seek excellence, arete. The darkness was lifting. With the reintroduction of writing, now a vastly superior Phoenician alphabet adapted for Greek, the polis ready to bloom, and a shared cultural identity forged in epic verse, the stage was set for an explosion. Episode 3, Titans of the New Age, c. 750 to 500 BC. The archaic explosion, colonists, tyrants, and lawgivers. The 8th century BC ignited like a powder keg. Population soared, and land grew scarce. The Greek spirit, constrained for centuries, erupted outward and inward in a creative frenzy that defined the contours of the classical world. The solution to land hunger was colonization. This was not empire, but a desperate, bold act of reproduction. Apollos would send out an expedition led by an oikistes, founder, who carried sacred fire from the homeland's hearth. They sought not conquest, but a place to farm. From the Black Sea to Marseille, from Cyrene in Africa to Sicily and southern Italy, Magna Graecia, hundreds of new Greek cities sprang up like scattered seeds. These colonies were independent but bound by sentimental and religious ties to their mother city, Metropolis. Trade networks exploded, spreading Greek goods, art, and ideas. Wealth, in the form of metal, grain, and slaves, flowed back to the mainland. This new wealth shattered the old, aristocratic order. A new class of wealthy non-nobles, often merchants or hoplites, demanded power. The result was social and political chaos, a fertile ground for the tyrant. In Greek terms, a tyrannos was not necessarily evil. He was an autocrat who seized power unconstitutionally, often with popular support. Men like Cypselus of Corinth and Pisistratus of Athens overthrew the ruling aristocracies. They built magnificent public works, fostered the arts, and curbed the power of the old elite. But their rule was personal, and their sons often became oppressive, leading to the downfall of tyranny itself. In response to this turmoil, the Greeks made their greatest political invention, law as the sovereign. Instead of one-man rule, some polis codified constitutions. In Sparta, the legendary lawgiver Lycurgus, whether myth or man, was said to have created the Great Rhetra, a rigid, totalitarian system designed for one purpose: to produce invincible soldiers. All life was communal and militarized. Boys were taken at 7 for brutal state training, a goge. The Helots, a conquered native population, were brutally subjugated to feed the Spartan war machine. It was a society frozen in fear of the Helots revolting, fear of external enemies, fear of any softening of discipline. Athens took the opposite path. After a period of tyranny, the lawgiver Solon was given extraordinary power in 594 BC to avert civil war. He enacted a seismic reform. He cancelled debts, freed those enslaved for debt, and based political rights not on birth, but on wealth, timocracy. He created the Council of 400 and allowed common citizens to sit on juries. His reforms planted the seed of democracy, though he warned, "I gave the people as much power as was sufficient, neither taking away nor adding to their honor. Those who had power and were glorious in wealth, I took care that they should suffer nothing unseemly." The age ended with two radical experiments: Sparta, a closed, collectivist fortress, and Athens, a restless, open society wrestling with the idea of citizen power. A collision was inevitable. Episode 4. The Great War, 499 to 479 BC. The Persian invasions and the forging of a Greek identity. For all their rivalries, the Greek polis shared a deep-seated belief in one thing: eleutheria, freedom, meaning the right of the citizen to live under his own laws, not the arbitrary will of a master. In 499 BC, this concept was put to the ultimate test. The Ionian Greek cities in Asia Minor, long under the dominion of the colossal Persian Empire, revolted. Athens sent a small fleet to aid them. It was a minor act, but it drew the eye of the King of Kings, Darius I. The Persian Empire was the superpower of the age, stretching from India to Egypt. Its monarch ruled as a god-king, his subjects mere slaves of his will. To Darius, the impudent Greeks were a border nuisance. In 490 BC, a Persian expeditionary force landed at Marathon, a plain just 26 miles from Athens. The Athenians, outnumbered and desperate, sent their legendary runner Phidippides to sprint to Sparta for help. The Spartans, citing a religious festival, delayed. The Athenians were alone. What happened next became legend. The Athenian hoplites, under General Miltiades, did the unthinkable. They charged the Persian line at a run, across nearly a mile of open ground, minimizing the effect of Persian arrows. In the brutal close-quarters combat that followed, the Greek phalanx proved devastating. The Persian line broke. 6,400 Persians fell for only 192 Athenians. A messenger, not Phidippides, whose run was to Sparta, raced to Athens, gasped, "We have won," and dropped dead. The myth of Persian invincibility was shattered. Darius's son, Xerxes, was determined to finish the job. In 480 BC, he launched a full-scale invasion of continental Greece, an army of perhaps 200,000 and a massive fleet. It was an act of hubris on a cosmic scale. Faced with annihilation, a fragile Hellenic league was formed, led by Sparta and Athens. The first act of defiance was at the mountain pass of Thermopylae. King Leonidas of Sparta led 300 of his elite hoplites and several thousand allies to hold the Hot Gates. For 3 days, they held off the entire Persian army. They were betrayed by a local shepherd, Ephialtes, who showed the Persians a mountain path. Surrounded, Leonidas and his 300 Spartans fought to the last man, creating an immortal legend of sacrifice. As the historian Herodotus wrote, they died obedient to their laws. As the Persians marched south, Athens was evacuated to the island of Salamis. The Athenian leader, the cunning Themistocles, had foreseen this. He had used a silver strike to build a massive fleet, betting Athens's future on the sea. He now engineered the decisive battle. Luring the Persian fleet into the narrow straits of Salamis, the heavier, more maneuverable Greek triremes rammed and destroyed the Persian armada. Xerxes, watching from a golden throne on shore, saw his dream sink. The next year, at Plataea, a combined Greek army led by the Spartan regent Pausanias crushed the Persian land forces for good. The victory was seismic. The tiny, fractious Greek world had defeated the greatest empire on earth. It forged a potent new idea, that free men, fighting for their homes and laws, could overcome any slave army. But the alliance was a marriage of convenience. Athens, its city sacked but its navy triumphant, emerged with immense prestige and ambition. Sparta, its army revered but its society paranoid and inward-looking, watched with deep suspicion. The golden thread of unity, woven in the fires of war, was already beginning to fray. Episode 5. The Athenian Experiment, 478 to 431 BC. Empire, democracy, and the Periclean dream. In the wake of the Persian retreat, the Greeks faced a vacuum of power. Who would lead, and to what end? Sparta, wanting no part of overseas commitments, went home. Athens stepped into the void with audacious vision. To guard against Persia's return, Athens formed the Delian League in 477 BC, a naval alliance of Ionian and Aegean states. Each member contributed ships or, more commonly, money, tribute, to a common treasury on the sacred island of Delos. It was a voluntary coalition for collective defense. But power corrupts. Athens, as the hegemon, began to act like a master. When the island of Naxos tried to leave the League, Athens besieged it and forced it back in. The League was becoming an Athenian empire. The tribute money flowed to Athens, funding an era of unprecedented splendor. This was the age of Pericles. A brilliant orator and strategist, Pericles dominated Athenian politics for 3 decades. He completed the radicalization of democracy, democratia, power of the people. He introduced pay for public service, jurors, council members, allowing even the poorest citizen to participate. The assembly, ecclesia, where every male citizen could speak and vote, became the true sovereign body, making decisions on war, peace, and law. Pericles' grandest vision was aesthetic and spiritual. He used the League's treasury, a controversial move, to rebuild the Acropolis, which the Persians had destroyed. He commissioned the Parthenon, a temple to Athena that was not just a religious monument, but a statement of Athenian imperial confidence and cultural supremacy. Its perfect proportions and stunning sculptural friezes celebrated the civic order and the mythic past of the city. Playwrights like Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides explored the deepest human dilemmas in the theatre of Dionysus. Philosophers like Anaxagoras, a friend of Pericles, speculated on the nature of the cosmos. The city was a dazzling marketplace of ideas. But this golden age had a dark lining. The democracy was direct, volatile, and ruthless. Ostracism, a yearly vote to exile any citizen for 10 years, could topple the greatest leaders on a whim. The empire was resented. Pericles' own mistress, Aspasia, was mocked and slandered as a foreign influence. And Athenian power instilled a deep, visceral fear in Sparta and its own alliance, the Peloponnesian League. Pericles knew war was coming. His strategy was purely Athenian: abandon the countryside, bring everyone inside the impregnable long walls that connected Athens to its port, Piraeus, and rely on the navy to feed the city and harass the enemy. It was a strategy of endurance, betting that Athenian spirit and wealth would outlast Spartan infantry prowess. In 431 BC, the tensions exploded. A conflict between Corinth, Sparta's ally, and Corcyra, backed by Athens, provided the spark. Sparta, finally goaded into action, invaded Attica. As the Spartans ravaged the farms and olive groves, the Athenians watched from their walls. Pericles stood before the assembly and gave his immortal funeral oration, as recorded by Thucydides. It was less a eulogy for the dead than a defiant manifesto for the living, a hymn to the open, daring, and free society Athens had built. Our constitution is called a democracy because power is in the hands not of a minority but of the whole people. We are free and tolerant in our private lives, but in public affairs we keep to the law. We cultivate refinement without extravagance and knowledge without effeminacy. We alone regard a man who takes no interest in public affairs, not as a harmless, but as a useless character. The die was cast. The two titans of the Greek world, Athens, the radical democracy and naval empire, and Sparta, the conservative oligarchy and land power, were locked in a struggle that would consume the entire Greek world. The grand experiment was about to be tested in a crucible of unprecedented violence. Episode 6, The Plague and the Sicilian Delusion, 431 to 413 BC. The Peloponnesian War, the unraveling begins. The war began with a clear, cold logic. Sparta's strength was its peerless army. Athens' strength was its invincible navy and boundless treasury. Pericles' strategy was to avoid a land battle at all costs, let Sparta wear itself out in annual invasions, and use the fleet to strangle Sparta's allies and supply lines. It was a war of attrition, and Athens was built to win it. Then, in 430 BC, the second year of the war, catastrophe struck from within. A horrifying plague broke out in the overcrowded, unsanitary city. It came from Egypt, carried by rats on grain ships. Thucydides, who survived it, left a clinical, terrifying account. Violent fever, convulsions, unquenchable thirst, bodies covered in suppurating sores, death within a week. Morality broke down. Men refused to bury their own families. The city became a charnel house. Perhaps a third of Athens' population, including its heart and mind, Pericles himself, died. The plague shattered Athenian nerve and unity. Pericles' disciplined strategy was abandoned. A new, ruthless, and ambitious generation rose to power in the assembly. Men like Cleon, a brash leather tanner who embodied the raw, unvarnished will of the common people, Demos. He demanded aggressive action. The war descended into a brutal stalemate of atrocities. When Athens captured the rebel city of Mytilene, Cleon argued for exterminating all adult males and enslaving the women and children. The assembly voted for it. A trireme was dispatched to carry out the orders. The next day, in a fit of collective remorse, they held a second debate, barely overturning the decree. A second ship raced out and arrived just in time to stop the massacre. The war spread like a cancer. In 422 BC, Cleon and the Spartan general Brasidas killed each other at the Battle of Amphipolis. Exhaustion set in, and a fragile peace was brokered in 421 BC, the Peace of Nicias. It was a peace in name only. Hostilities continued by proxy, and a dangerous new player emerged, Alcibiades. Alcibiades was Pericles' ward, breathtakingly handsome, wildly charismatic, brilliant, and utterly without scruples. He was the embodiment of Athenian daring turned to pure, self-serving ambition. He dreamed of a grand stroke that would win the war and make him immortal, the Sicilian expedition. In 415 BC, he convinced the assembly to launch a massive armada to conquer Sicily, particularly the powerful city of Syracuse. It was a gamble of epic proportions, based on dreams of endless grain and wealth. The night before the fleet sailed, a shocking act of sacrilege occurred. The Hermi, stone markers of the god Hermes, throughout Athens were mutilated. Alcibiades was accused, likely by political enemies. Demanding to stand trial immediately, he was instead sent to command the expedition, with orders to return for judgment later, a fatal mistake. The expedition began with glorious pomp, but soon after arriving in Sicily, a state ship arrived to arrest Alcibiades. Knowing he would be condemned, he performed his ultimate act of betrayal. He defected to Sparta. There, he advised the Spartans on how to beat Athens, urging them to send a general to help Syracuse and, most crucially, to fortify Decilia in Attica, permanently cutting off Athens from its silver mines. In Sicily, without Alcibiades' genius, the Athenian campaign faltered. The Syracusans, fortified by Spartan aid, fought with desperate courage. The Athenian navy was trapped and destroyed in the city's great harbour. The retreating Athenian army was harried, slaughtered, and finally surrendered. The survivors were thrown into the quarries of Syracuse, to die of exposure, thirst, and starvation. Thucydides' verdict was final. They were destroyed, as the saying is, with a total destruction. Their fleet, their army, everything was destroyed, and few out of many returned home. The news broke Athens. The city was plunged into a state of shock, grief, and terror. The treasury was empty, the flower of its youth dead in a Sicilian quarry. The Spartan fort at Decilia bled the countryside dry. The golden thread of Athenian confidence had been snapped by its own hubris. The endgame had begun. Episode 7, The Last Dance of Democracy, 413 to 404 BC. Revolution, terror, and the fall of Athens. The disaster in Sicily was a shock from which Athens never truly recovered. Its empire began to revolt. Its treasury was empty. Yet, in a display of almost superhuman resilience, the democracy refused to die quietly. They built a new fleet from the last of their resources, melting down gold statues from the Acropolis to mint coins. They fought on. But the strain broke the social contract. The core conflict between the wealthy few, oligoi, and the many poor, demos, erupted into open-class warfare. In 411 BC, with the city demoralized and Alcibiades, now switching sides again, promising Persian money if Athens abandoned democracy, an oligarchic coup took place. A group of 400 extremists seized power, murdering democratic opponents. It was a reign of terror, but short-lived. The army and fleet at Samos remained stanchly democratic, refusing to acknowledge the new regime. Within months, the 400 fell, replaced by a broader oligarchy of 5,000, which itself soon gave way to a restored, vengeful democracy. Through this chaos, Alcibiades returned as a savior. Leading the fleet, he won a series of stunning victories. In 410 BC, at the Battle of Cyzicus, he annihilated the Spartan fleet. For a glorious moment, it seemed Athens might yet snatch victory from the jaws of defeat. He was welcomed back to Athens in 407 BC with full honors, his past crimes forgiven. The revival was illusory. Athenian luck had run out. Sparta had finally found a naval commander of genius, Lysander. More importantly, Lysander had secured what Athens could not, the full financial backing of the Persian prince Cyrus the Younger. With endless Persian gold, Lysander could rebuild fleets and pay higher wages, luring away Athenian-trained rowers. In 406 BC, with Alcibiades temporarily away, the Athenian fleet won a costly victory at Arginusi. In the storm that followed, the generals failed to pick up survivors from the water. Back in Athens, a hysterical assembly, whipped into a frenzy by demagogues, tried the 8 generals collectively for negligence and executed 6 of them, including Pericles' son. Socrates, serving in the council that day, famously refused to endorse the illegal procedure, a lone voice of reason in a mob gone mad. The end came in 405 BC at Aegospotami, in the Hellespont. The Athenian fleet was beached. Lysander, watching and waiting, struck when the crews were scattered foraging. He captured 171 of Athens' 180 triremes almost without a fight. He then executed 3,000 Athenian prisoners. It was a total massacre. Lysander sailed slowly to Athens, methodically capturing her remaining allies and blockading Piraeus. Starvation gripped the city. Through the winter of 405-4 BC, Athens held out, but hope was gone. In April 404 BC, with food exhausted, Athens surrendered. The terms were harsh. The long walls and the fortifications of Piraeus were to be torn down to the sound of flutes. The fleet was reduced to 12 ships. The empire was dissolved, and Athens was forced to become a subordinate ally of Sparta. The democracy was to be abolished. As the walls, the very symbol of Athenian power and the Periclean strategy, came down, the conquerors celebrated, believing it was the beginning of freedom for Greece. For Athens, it was the end of its century of glory. The great experiment in radical democracy and empire was over, crushed by the relentless, gold-backed discipline of Sparta. Episode 8, The Sword of Sparta, 404 to 371 BC. A bitter victory and the hegemony of force. Sparta stood unchallenged as the hegemon of Greece. But the victory at Aegospotami was a poison pill. The qualities that made Sparta invincible in war, rigid discipline, austerity, and a deep suspicion of the outside world, made it utterly incapable of ruling a peace. Lysander did not just defeat Athens. He installed brutal, narrow oligarchies of 10 men, Dicaches, and a Spartan overseer, Harmost, in every former Athenian subject city. These puppet regimes, known as the 30 tyrants in Athens itself, ruled by terror, executing and exiling democrats and seizing property. In Athens, the 30, led by Critias, killed more Athenians in 8 months than had died in the last decade of the war. The city was drowning in blood. Sparta's hegemony quickly revealed itself as naked tyranny. It betrayed its own cause of freeing the Greeks by handing over the Ionian cities back to Persian control in exchange for more gold. The Treaty of Antalcidas, 387 BC. The great liberator had become a pawn of the King of Kings. Sparta's downfall began with its own nature. Its system was a biological time bomb. The citizen population, the Spartiates, was tiny and constantly declining, due to harsh inheritance laws and the perpetual risk of war. They were vastly outnumbered by the helots they terrorized and the perioikoi, dwellers around, they disdainfully used for trade. Their society was a pressure cooker. Thebes, long subservient to Sparta, became the catalyst for its collapse. In 379 BC, a daring-the-band coup, led by Pelopidas, expelled the Spartan garrison and restored democracy. Soon, the band general of unparalleled genius emerged, Epaminondas. He was a philosopher-soldier who grasped the fatal flaw in Spartan warfare, the phalanx's obsession with the right wing. At the Battle of Leuctra in 371 BC, Epaminondas performed a military revolution. He massed his best troops, the Sacred Band, an elite force of 150 pairs of male lovers, on the left wing, 50 ranks deep, and advanced them ahead of his center and right. The shallower Spartan right wing, expecting an easy victory, was crushed by this concentrated hammer blow. King Cleombrotus was killed, and the myth of Spartan invincibility on land died with him. The following year, Epaminondas did the unthinkable. He invaded the Spartan homeland of Laconia itself, a sight no enemy army had seen in centuries. He did not attack the city, but he marched to Messenia and did what Sparta feared most. He liberated the Helots. He refounded the city of Messene on Mount Ithome, with walls so massive their ruins still stand. With this single act, he gutted the Spartan economic and social system. Sparta was never a major power again. It shriveled into a local curiosity, obsessed with its past glory. The hegemony of force had lasted barely 30 years. The vacuum of power was now total. Exhausted, bankrupt, and leaderless, Greece awaited a new order. Episode 9. The Philosopher King, 359 to 336 BC. The rise of Macedonia and the mind of Alexander. While the southern Greek city-states exhausted themselves in endless, petty wars, a new power was coalescing in a wild, mountainous north, Macedonia. The Greeks viewed the Macedonians as semi-barbaric cousins, their kings ruled by personal loyalty and tribal custom, not written law. But this was about to change with the accession of a man who would unite Greece by force of will and military genius, Philip II. Philip had spent his youth as a hostage in Thebes, where he studied the military innovations of Epaminondas. He returned to a kingdom on the brink of collapse, surrounded by enemies. In 2 decades, he transformed it. His reforms were total. The Macedonian phalanx, he equipped his infantry with the sarissa, a pike up to 18 feet long. This created an impenetrable, moving forest of spear points. The companion cavalry, heteroi, he developed an elite shock cavalry of nobility, armed with lances, to serve as the decisive hammer to the phalanx's anvil. Diplomacy and bribery. No fortress is impregnable, he said, to which a mule can carry a load of gold. He married 7 times for political alliance. Relentless campaigning. He defeated the Illyrians, Thracians, and the Salians, securing his borders and resources. The southern Greeks, particularly the Athenian orator Demosthenes, saw the danger. In a series of fiery speeches, the Philippics, Demosthenes tried to rally Athens against the barbarian from the north. But the poleis were too divided. At the Battle of Chaeronea in 338 BC, Philip's combined arms army crushed the allied forces of Athens and Thebes. The Sacred Band was annihilated where they stood. Greek autonomy died on that field. Philip formed the League of Corinth, a forced alliance of all Greek states, except Sparta, with himself as hegemon. His stated goal, to lead a united Greece in a war of revenge against the Persian Empire. He never got the chance. In 336 BC, at his daughter's wedding, he was assassinated by a disgruntled nobleman. The throne passed to his 20-year-old son, Alexander. The Greeks saw a chance to revolt. They did not know the man they were dealing with. Alexander had been tutored from age 13 by Aristotle, who instilled in him a love for Homer, Greek culture, and scientific inquiry. From his father, he inherited boundless ambition and an unmatched army. From his tempestuous mother, Olympias, he believed he was descended from Achilles. When Thebes rebelled, Alexander marched his army 240 miles in 2 weeks. He stormed the city, razed it to the ground, sparing only the house of the poet Pindar, and sold its population into slavery. The message was brutal and clear. The other poleis submitted. Alexander was now the undisputed master of Greece, but his gaze was fixed eastward, on the ancient empire that had once invaded his homeland. The crusade Philip had planned was now Alexander's destiny. The fractured world of the polis was over. The age of the personal empire, led by a godlike king, had begun. Episode 10, To the Ends of the Earth, 334 to 323 BC. Alexander's conquests and the shattering of the world. In the spring of 334 BC, Alexander crossed the Hellespont into Asia Minor. He made a pilgrimage to Troy, sacrificing at the tomb of Achilles, his spiritual ancestor. He was leading a small but supremely professional army of about 40,000 Macedonians and Greeks against the vast, multi-ethnic Persian Empire of Darius III. The first clash came at the river Granicus. Alexander led a reckless, near-suicidal cavalry charge across the river, scattering the Persian satraps. It set the pattern, dazzling personal bravery and tactical aggression. The following year, at Issus, he faced Darius himself for the first time. Outnumbered, Alexander drove his companion cavalry at the Persian center, aiming directly for Darius. The great king, seeing the Macedonian king cutting through his bodyguard, panicked, turned his chariot, and fled. His family, mother, wife, children, were captured. Alexander treated them with royal courtesy, a masterstroke of propaganda. Instead of chasing Darius, Alexander turned south to secure the Persian naval bases along the Mediterranean coast. At Tyre, a seemingly impregnable island city, he displayed his relentless engineering genius, building a massive causeway to reach its walls. After a 7-month siege, he took the city in a storm of bloodshed. He entered Egypt as a liberator. At the oracle of Siwa Oasis in the Libyan desert, the priests hailed him as the son of Zusammen. Alexander began to internalize the idea of his own divinity, a concept utterly alien and repellent to his Macedonian veterans, for whom the king was first among equals. The final showdown came in October 331 BC at Gaugamela, on the plains of modern Iraq. Darius had assembled a colossal army from the breadth of his empire. The battle was a masterpiece of tactical deception and shock. Alexander used his phalanx as a fixing force, creating a gap in the Persian line into which he drove his cavalry wedge, again aiming for Darius. Once more, the great king fled. The Persian Empire's heart stopped beating. Alexander marched into Babylon, then to the ceremonial capitals of Persepolis and Susa. At Persepolis, after months of occupation, the royal palace was burned. Was it a deliberate, symbolic act of revenge for the burning of Athens, or a drunken accident at a revel? The truth is lost, but the Achaemenid dynasty's glory went up in flames. The conquest became an obsession. He pursued the fleeing Darius, only to find him murdered by his own satrap, Bessus, declaring himself the rightful successor to the Persian throne. Alexander now had to subdue his own new empire. This led him into the wilds of Bactria and Sogdiana, Afghanistan, fighting a brutal guerrilla war. Here, he married the Bactrian princess Roxana, a political union that horrified his men. Pushing ever eastward, yearning for the edge of the world, he invaded India in 326 BC. At the Battle of the Hydaspes River, he defeated King Porus and his war elephants in a masterful night crossing and flanking maneuver. But here, at the peak of his military success, his army broke. After 8 years and 11,000 miles, the men refused to go further into the monsoon and rumors of vast armies beyond the Ganges. Alexander, in a fury of disappointment, was forced to turn back. The return journey was a disaster. They sailed down the Indus, fighting all the way. Alexander was nearly killed storming a town, taking a spear to the lung. He led his army through the brutal Judrosian desert, southern Iran, where thousands died of thirst and heat. He reached Babylon in 323 BC, his body broken but his mind racing with plans to conquer Arabia and explore the Caspian Sea. Then, after a sudden fever following a bout of heavy drinking, the king who had seemed invincible died in the palace of Nebuchadnezzar II. He was 32 years old. When his generals asked to whom he left his empire, his last words were said to be, "To the strongest." With those words, he condemned the world to 40 years of warfare. The golden thread of Greek culture had been carried to the borders of India, woven into the fabric of Persian, Egyptian, and Eastern traditions to create the Hellenistic world. But the unity he embodied died with him. The age of the city-state was long gone. The age of the rival dynasts, the successors, Diadochi, was about to begin. The world was larger, richer, and more interconnected than ever, but it was also a world shattered and waiting to be remade. Final episode: The Strongest, 323 BC, 146 BC and beyond. The Successors, the Roman Shadow, and the Enduring Thread. Alexander left no heir but an unborn son by Roxana and a half-brother with a feeble mind. His empire was a personal conquest, held together only by the force of his will. With that will extinguished, the vacuum of power sucked his generals into a vortex of war that lasted 2 generations. These were the Diadochi, the successors. The wars were not about ideology or freedom, but pure, dynastic ambition. The core territories fractured. Ptolemy seized Egypt, creating a wealthy, stable Greek dynasty that would last until Cleopatra. Seleucus took the vast Asian heartlands, from Syria to Babylon, founding the sprawling, often unstable Seleucid Empire. Antigonus and his descendants fought for Macedonia and Greece. Others like Lysimachus and Cassander carved out smaller kingdoms. After the Battle of Ipsus in 301 BC, where Antigonus the One-Eyed fell, the dream of a unified empire was dead. The Hellenistic Age was born, a world of rival Greek-speaking kingdoms, colossal in scale, where kings were living gods and cities like Alexandria in Egypt, with its legendary library and lighthouse, became new centers of science, learning, and luxury far surpassing the old polis. Meanwhile, in the West, a new power had been rising in silence. Rome. Initially just another Italian state, it had mastered the grim art of republican politics and relentless, disciplined warfare. It first encountered the Hellenistic world through the ambitions of Pyrrhus, king of Epirus, who invaded Italy in 280 BC. He won Pyrrhic victories against the Romans, victories so costly they spelled defeat. "One more such victory," he said, "and I shall be lost." The Romans learned from their Greek adversaries, adopting their military tactics and absorbing their culture. The clash was inevitable. Rome's expansion eastward was a series of brutal, decisive confrontations with the Hellenistic kingdoms. The Macedonian Wars. Rome positioned itself as the liberator of the Greek cities from Macedonian control. After defeating Philip V and his son Perseus, Rome dismantled the Antigonid kingdom in 168 BC. In a single, symbolic act of terror, the Roman general Aemilius Paulus sacked the ancient city of Epirus, enslaving 150,000 people. The Seleucid confrontation. The brilliant Seleucid king Antiochus III dreamed of restoring his empire's glory. He invaded Greece, only to be crushed by the Romans at the Battle of Thermopylae, 191 BC, and decisively at Magnesia, 190 BC. The Seleucids were reduced to a rump state, their power broken forever. The final act, Corinth, 146 BC. Greek resentment of Roman high-handedness sparked the Achaean War. It was a doomed rebellion. The Roman consul Lucius Mummius besieged and captured the great trading city of Corinth. He gave it to his soldiers for plunder, then systematically razed it to the ground. The men were killed, the women and children enslaved. The priceless works of art were looted and shipped to Rome. That same year, Rome destroyed Carthage, erasing another ancient rival. Corinth's destruction was a message written in fire and blood. Macedonian kingship was already gone. Now, the last pretense of Greek political independence was extinguished. Greece became the Roman province of Achaia. The end of the story? The birth of a legacy. So, did the golden thread snap? In a political sense, yes. The polis was extinct as a sovereign entity. The flash of Athenian democracy, the grim discipline of Sparta, the personal genius of Alexander, all were buried under the relentless, systematizing weight of the Roman Republic and later, the Roman Empire. But the thread was not made of crowns or constitutions. It was woven from more enduring materials. The Greek language became the lingua franca of the Eastern Roman Empire and the vehicle for the Christian New Testament. Greek philosophy, Plato, Aristotle, the Stoics, the Epicureans, was adopted, adapted, and became the bedrock of Roman and later Western thought. Greek art, architecture, and literature defined Roman aesthetics. Rome conquered Greece militarily, but Greece conquered Rome culturally, as the poet Horace noted. The concepts of democracy, civic debate, individual heroism, tragic hubris, and the pursuit of knowledge, history, never died. They lay dormant, to be rediscovered and reinterpreted for centuries to come. The final scene of our story is not a battlefield, but a library. It is the 1st century BC in Rome. A wealthy Roman senator, an avid collector, pays a fortune for a true Greek statue by Praxiteles or a first-edition scroll of Thucydides. He hires Greek tutors for his sons and a Greek philosopher as a live-in intellectual. He decorates his villa with frescoes of the Trojan War. He is, in every way that matters to him, trying to be Greek. The civilization that began in the burning ruins of Knossos and the warrior citizen ideal of the polis has been defeated, absorbed, and transformed. But its light, refracted through the Roman prism, would travel forward in time, waiting to ignite the minds of a Renaissance, an Enlightenment, and beyond. The golden thread was not the history of a nation. It was the story of an idea of what it means to be human, to question, to strive, and to create. And that idea proved stronger than any empire.